I think my teacher might be a serial killer. It started when my English lit professor told me to talk with him after class. I remember his hazel eyes boring into my soul when he asked me that, his wavy dark hair gently caressing the sides of his head. If it sounds like I had a crush on this guy, I did. Professor Fine was only 3 years older than me, a brand new addition to the King's Head campus. I took his class because I needed an easy English credit, but I stayed because I fell madly in love with him. I suspect many of his students felt the same, as the majority were glued to his every word. He had just sent out his first big assignment, what we did over the summer. As a fun little test of our budding prose, I wrote about the wild animal that terrorized our neighborhood but was vanquished by one brave little dog. When he asked me to stay after class, I suspected he wanted to congratulate me on my amazing story and would maybe even like to discuss it over dinner? Perhaps just the two of us? I eagerly waited in my seat, feeling the jealous eyes of my classmates drive daggers into my heart. Mr. Fine stood at the back wall, a polite smile on his face as he nodded at the leaving masses. He even shook a few hands like he was a politician or something. He wore a thin brown overcoat with a white shirt underneath. He had a slender frame. I imagine he worked out a lot after class. He was tall as well, almost reaching 7 feet. He would dwarf me just by standing next to me, which I found amusing to say the least. Soon it was just the two of us. I could feel the romantic tension in the air. In hindsight, I think I was projecting pretty heavily. He let out a deep sigh and strode over to me, reaching into his coat. Was it a flower, a love note, some other romantic gesture I can't think of? He pulled out my paper and smacked in onto my desk. That's when he looked dead into my eyes and said the magic words. "I am very disappointed in this, Abby May." Wait, what? He noticed my scowl of confusion and continued. The assignment was, what you did over the summer, not what you did in Fantasyland. Your style is also very generic, I have to say, riddled with contractions and self-inserting. He went on and on to say that while the scenario was intriguing, he felt it had missed the mark entirely. He said I had potential, but right now I was painfully mediocre. I was stunned, to say the least. Each word felt like he was bashing me in the head with a brick. I slumped over in my seat, on the verge of tears, frankly. It did happen, I said softly amongst his criticism. He shook his head once more. Look, I'm being too harsh here, but only because I think you have the potential. You're a very creative girl, Abby May, but this? He spoke. It's just silly. He went on to tell me he would expect a rewrite within a week, and it was okay if it was boring. After that, I dreaded going to Professor Fine's class. At every turn, he barked down my ideas and pushed me towards realistic standards with my essays. It was odd to me, an English professor so obsessed with realism and a disdain for something out there. I wasn't the only one in the class struggling with that, but I was his star pupil in mediocrity. I thought about complaining to the dean about him, but he wasn't inappropriate or anything like that. He was just a dick. There were a golden few he would lavish praise onto, and let me tell you, these people were dull. I mean, I know it is mean to say, but Jessica's first essay, it was literally titled, "I went to the mall and bought a new dress." It was just 5 pages of her talking about a dress, some silk strap-on eyesore, and she just went on and on and on. She used the word delicious to describe the thing 7 times, yet Fine couldn't get enough of her. He praised her writing as the best in the class, and she tried to play coy, blushing and giggling and waving her dye job hair around like she owed the place. Was I jealous? Yes, of course. Fine had given me the ick, but a crush is hard to get over sometimes. Which is why one can understand when I saw Jessica and Fine having lunch off campus the other day. Well, I just had to follow them. I had just left CVS to pick up some stuff when I eyed Fine and Jessica walking into some fancy Italian place. My heart skipped a beat as I noticed them, hand in hand. Fine has a smile on his face that could tame a lioness, and Jessica fit the bill perfectly. In my stupor, I was nearly run over by someone, and I jumped off the side off the road. I still don't know why I did this outside of some petty whim, but after a moment, I had snuck into the belly of the beast. I sat in the back corner, massive menu in hand as I peeked over it, eyeing the happy couple sitting about 7 tables away. A well-dressed waiter had already brought a bottle for the table. It looked red and expensive. I could make out a painting of a beautiful grape orchid on the label. Fine took the man's hand with a quick wink and a sly shake. The waiter came away and glanced at his hand, nodding at Fine. Jessica seemed impressed by this power move. Frankly, I thought it was a bit cliché. I stalked them for about an hour. They made pleasant dinner conversation and gorged themselves on salad and pasta. I ordered a meatball sandwich to keep my cover, my eyes still glued to them. What did Jessica have that enchanted him so? Her latest essay was about a dog she saw last week. It was 2 paragraphs long. All it did was wax and moan about she had wanted a dog but settled for a cat. The poor cat. Fine had said in front of the whole class that it had nearly brought him to tears. All that gushing made me want to dry heave. It occurred to me then that perhaps Fine was lying and even had ulterior motives. I was overjoyed at the fact that he might have been a secret sleaze. It didn't mean I wasn't a shitty writer. All it meant was he didn't find me attractive. What a dick. The check came and Fine coped a feel as he helped Jessica out of the chair. Her giggling would drive most men to madness. It grated on my ears like someone was driving nails into my head. I winced as the pair left the restaurant. I took out some change from my wallet and skipped out of there, following them some more. I stayed behind them on a snail's pace, darting behind cover like I was a spy on a mission. They didn't seem to come here in a car, and it was getting late. The evening sky enveloped the world above like an old friend. Fine quickened his pace, grabbing Jessica's shoulder as they turned a corner. I followed them just long enough to see that they had walked into a shady hotel. It was 2 stories tall and had cracked lime pane covering it. A man sat by the front entrance on a shitty plastic chair. He had a burly mustache and wore a floral shirt. Fine, and Jessica skirted past the watch guy, who nodded in their direction, barely acknowledging them. This was a strange sight indeed. How long had this place even been here? Kinghead was a college town, barely any crime or anything like that outside the occasional drunken spat between frat bros. Seeing this unsightly building made my skin crawl, and I couldn't quite place the reason why. I crept towards the motel like a cat, tiptoeing in the early night air. It had finally begun to cool up north. The crisp air pecked at my throat like icy shards of glass. I had almost made it inside when the guy at the door stuck his foot out. "Haven't seen you around here, hombre," the man said in a gruff accent. He barely looked at me. I could see now he had a small book in his hand. "Just wanted to check in. Need a break, you know." "You working? Doc gets a cut if you're using one of the rooms here," he explained. A knot formed in my stomach as the sleazy realization hit me. It suddenly hit me. I was very much alone in a seedy part of town. I could feel steam pouring out of my beet red face as I stammered and tried to get away from the doorman. "No, not really like that. Cool if you are, but not really my thing," I explained, backing away. Now the man looked up, eyeing me like a slab of veal. "Too bad. A lot of guys dig on the red." He flashed me a perverted grin as I held down my lunch. "You want a room? It's $80 a night. Check out at dawn. I'm Jorge. I'm the keeper." He flashed his teeth at me, and I could make out at least 3 missing among his rotten set. "You aren't the doc," I said dismissively, my sense starting to return to me. Honestly, as I am writing this, I am just coming across as a crazy stalker with a weird crush. It's not a good look, I'll admit that. I was getting ready just to wash my hands of the whole embarrassing affair when Jorge, the keeper, spoke up. "Nah, this here is Doc Fine's place. Inherited it from his folks. Seen better days, I know." Jorge grimaced. My heart skipped a beat at that. The hell was a college professor doing owning some rundown motel, let alone brining one of his students to it? "If you want to talk to him, you'll have to wait. He's, entertaining," Jorge crookedly said. A wave of disgust hit me like a tsunami. That knot in my stomach was doing backflips now. I was about to speak up when I heard a loud yelp echo out from inside the building. Jorge turned to meet it and then gave me the side eye. "See what I mean?" I rushed past him as he called back to me, but I was in raider mode now. The lobby was dank and dry at the same time. The whiff of age-old musk hung in the air. The front desk was clear, and I could see coat racks and file cabinets behind it. I focused and tried to find where that cry had come from when I was met with a harsher shriek. It was coming from the back hall, all the way at the end. I sprinted down it, desperately trying to find the source. I don't know what I thought I was going to do. I had my pen taser on me, but that was about it. I heard a loud crash, like a lamp breaking against the wall from the farthest room on my right. It was shut tight, my feet skittering off the ground as I stopped in front of the unassuming door. I froze in front of it, realizing that honestly I was probably about to make a fool of myself. But that knot was strangling my intestines. I knocked on the door to no response. There was another muffled cry, like someone was struggling to breathe. I heard a whimpered no, and my heart froze as I recognized the voice's owner. I pounded on the door this time and shouted Jessica's name. I was ignored once more, but this time the door creaked open. I could hear better inside, a man grunting and a horrid gagging sound. I peeked in, and my eye widened. Fine was on top of Jessica, shirtless. I could make out scratch marks on his well-toned back. I saw Jessica's face, black eyeliner streaked down as it turned a purple hue. She weakly slapped at Fine's face as she gasped for air, but he would not relent. He tightened his grip around her neck, and I could hear her windpipe start to crush in his grasp. Jessia darted her bloodshot eyes around the room until they landed on me. She raised a hand towards me as her eyes pleaded for help. I leapt back with a gasp and realized what I had to do. I dug around in my pocket for my taser and brought it out. It was thin and cheap, but when you jabbed it into someone, it stung like a son of a bitch. With a breath, I burst into the room and leapt onto Fine and jabbed the taser into his side. The zzz of it rang through the air. Fine barely felt it. He released his grip from Jessica to try and pry me off his back. I was wailing on him, my fists digging into the side of his head like a wild spider monkey. He flexed and pushed me off with a thud. I collapsed to the ground in a heap as Fine stepped off the bed. He was breathing heavily and foaming at the mouth like a rabid wolf. I scrambled towards the door, my back facing the wall. I held up the taser like a loaded gun and aimed it at him. He loomed over me as he took a step towards me. Then he glanced back to Jessica. Her eyes stared blankly at the ceiling, a thin line of blood starting to pool out of her mouth. The knot began stabbing me in the guts, like a sassy woman telling you, "I told you so." "It's unfortunate, Abby. You were never supposed to see this side of me." Fine waxed poetically. I backed myself against the door and primed myself to flee, still aiming my shaky hand at him. He took a cautious step closer and I practically hissed at him, jabbing the air with my taser. "It may seem barbaric what I did here, but I promise you it all serves a grander purpose." Fine chuckled. Her mind was dull and witless, but her eyes, her beautiful baby blues, not to mention her skin, so pure and porcelain, not a mark on it. "Unlike some," he snarled. I pushed myself up, Fine towering over me like a raging bull. Flames of fury danced in his hazel eyes, and he wore the face of a raving loon, yet his tone remained calm and collected. Stay back, or I swear I'll jam this thing so far down your throat you'll light up like a Christmas tree," I commanded. He chortled at this, my half-naked teacher. "Such an imaginative facade you put on, Abby May. It's why I didn't want to pick you. What part of you could I enjoy? Could I use?" The creep leered at me, and I shuddered but held my head fast. "I suppose once I'm digging around in there, I'll find something of use." With that, he lunged at me, and I collapsed out the door into the hall with him on top of me. He gnashed his teeth at me like a wild dog, and he tried to wrap his hands around my throat. I could feel his rough hands start to tighten and choke as it became harder and harder to breathe. I gasped out for air as my vision began to blur. All I could see was Fine smiling at me, his deranged face looking down at me as he choked me. No, I wasn't going to die here. Not like this. I used a free hand to search the filthy hotel floor. It smelled like vinegar and shame. Finally, I found my dropped tased and gripped it. With all my remaining strength, I jabbed the taser right in his eye socket. A dull blue light flashed in the hall, and blood spurted onto my face. But I could breathe again. Fine collapsed on the ground next to me. He was screaming in agony. I scrambled to get up and ran down the hall. Jorge the keeper blocked my path, a worried expression on his face when he saw me. I brushed past him at light speed as he scurried over to the wailing half-blind man on the floor. The next few hours were a blur of panic and adrenaline as I went back to my dorm, cell phone in hand. You might be surprised, but I didn't call the cops right away. How would I even explain it to start with? Oh, I was out stalking my teacher and he just happened to kill his date? Even if they believed me, he would have had plenty of time to get rid of the body, and he was missing an eye. He could easily try and turn it around on me like I was a jealous lover or something. I had choke marks, sure, but what would that prove? It would prove I was into kinky shit and became jealous and murdered Jessia and tried to kill Fine. So, I sat there in my bed spiraling for what seemed like hours. My roommate, Barabra, hadn't come back yet. So it was just me sitting there, thumping my foot on the ground and scratching my arm to feel somewhat in control of the situation. As the panic began to wind down, I heard a knock on the door. I froze. Barb wouldn't knock, she had no sense of privacy. I stood up in silence as I tried to remember where I had thrown my taser in my mania. Another knock on the door, less friendly than before. "Who are you?" I called out. "It's Jorge, miss. I'm the keeper." Jorge's voice replied back. It was full of sorrow and uneasiness. "I called the cops. They'll be here any second." I lied. "Please, miss, just open the door. The doc wants to talk to you. Clear the air, He clumsily tried to explain. "He can explain to the cops." "Miss, we both know you didn't call them," Jorge said plainly. "Otherwise, the doc would already be on the run. He almost ran, had me pack his go bag and everything. But he wants to stay, finish his work. He thinks you might be able to help." My heart burned at the prospect of helping that freak instead of laughing as the cops hauled him in. But I had that gut feeling again, like the only way to catch him was to go with Jorge here. He had said it himself. He was on the verge of running anyway. I failed to save Jessica, even if this was all a cruel thing I had stumbled across. Wasn't it my duty to see it through now? After a moment, I unlocked the door and peeked my head out. There stood Jorge, a gruesome look on his face. I peeked my head out and glanced around. It seemed like he had come alone. "Fine then. I have my head on my phone, 911 on speed dial. You guys try anything, it's over." "Señorita, if the doc tries anything," Jorge started. "I'll deal with him myself." He reached into his floral shirt and showed me a holstered pistole. I had that sinking feeling once more, but I just nodded my head and prepared to meet Dr. Fine. I'm posting this now so people know where I am, and if I don't come back, well, hopefully I come back.